Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. First item is Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have all members present. Supervisor Reynolds is participating remotely. All others are here. Public comment, nobody has approached either the clerk or myself. So we'll move on to approval of the January 14th minutes, which were in your packet. What are your wishes? Supervisor Hart, move to approve?
Yes, but I wanted to note a correction in the minutes.
Well, before we move to approve, why don't you state your correction?
I noticed that in 6A1, they were missing who seconded that motion. So if we could just approve the minutes with that correction, then I think we'd be good with that. And then I will make that motion to approve the minutes with that correction.
Go back and see who it was.
Good catch. We don't have a to-re list on the committee, so I think we would need to put the person in there. So with that, we will have the clerk insert that with that change. What, are there any other questions? So was that a motion to approve? Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the minute, subject to the inserting the second for item 6A1, will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. We'll move on to 6A1, claim disallowance, Cameron Ford.
WMIC is requesting disallowance of this claim. Plow was actively plowing. Mr. Ford was coming the opposite direction. A rock kicked up and cracked his windshield. It was a discretionary immunity, no negligence on the part of the driver.
Are there any questions? If not, what are your wishes relative to the claim from Cameron Ford? Supervisor Lemmer?
I would make a motion to issue the disallowance and then provide a copy of the disallowance to WMIC.
Is there a second? Seconded by Chair Gibbs. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Claim disallowance, Trayson Sipin.
So this is actually Trevor Sipin. I'm not sure how to say the last name. Similar situation where a plow was actively plowing and lost a wing of the plow and then continued driving and recognized later that it was missing when he went back the following day, located the plow piece. But Mr. Sipian's, I think, son was driving and hit an unidentified piece of metal and ended up with a flat tire. WMIC is recommending disallowance as this is a discretionary immunity with no negligence on the part of the driver. If you want to feel good about the people we serve, check out the last line of his claim that he submitted to the clerk on page 17 of your packet. Says, thank you to all who work hard to keep our roadways safe. P.S.
All right, are there any questions? If not, what are your wishes? What are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer?
And I would move to issue the formal disallowance and provide a copy of it to WMIC.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the disallowance will signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. 6B1, request for Rules Review Committee to consider potential amendments to Chapter 2 regarding budget amendment process and potential clarifying policy. Administrator Leonard and Sam, I'm sure.
Yes, for sure, Sam. I will kick us off. So there's a number of pages in your packet. I believe it begins on page 20. And full disclosure to start, the memo was drafted for the Rules Review Committee. It certainly is not meant to serve as a formal recommendation in light of the conversation that was had at Rules. That's how we ended up here, is that the discussion at Rules Review was that seeking this committee's insight would be appropriate. But suffice to say, as we were going through the Rules Review Committee process, one of the things Sam was able to find was we have an inconsistency, an internal conflict essentially between two existing rules sections as spelled out in the memo. Those inconsistencies tie back to Wisconsin Statute 6590, sub 5, sub B, which affords counties some level of flexibility with respect to budget amendments. Specifically, it gives counties the ability to designate a committee to have the ability to make budget amendments following annual adoption of a budget, provided that a couple of conditions are met. Most notably, that the budget transfer itself doesn't exceed 10% of the funds originally budgeted within the office, department, or activity within that proposed amendment. So why does that matter? Well, Marathon County's rules, specifically the rule relating to this committee, incorporates that language, giving the HR, Finance, and Property Committee that authority. Operationally, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, you've never really done it that way. But you do have another rule that requires that all budget amendments, regardless of size, have to go to the full board. So that was what, again, the impetus to the discussion at Rules about really how does the county board want to organize itself and how does it want to work? And what process do you want for budget amendments? Why that small inconsistency took on a bit of a life of its own is that when Sam initially brought this to me, it's like, hey, I wonder how other counties do it, and a number of other counties certainly take advantage of that flexibility afforded under 6590 sub 5 sub B. But we also found a couple of really good examples that we thought to clarify what is actually a budget amendment versus a budget adjustment, and where specifically do those budget amendments, how do they travel through the county board process? We found some good, what we thought were good policy examples from another of other counties that we discussed at Rules Review. All that is to say that Rules Review wanted to have this committee take up that discussion. So that, again, not only do you have the memo in your packet, but you also have what we thought would be a good place to start, and that is the long-term development of a budget adjustment policy that really spells out how do we budget, what are the, in terms of kind of the definitions that we need. We really, I think, would be well served by having a definition of appropriation and appropriation unit to really have additional clarity on what is a budget adjustment that doesn't go to the county board, and we have done that historically. We don't, if we spend more money on contractual services and we don't use equipment, we don't come back to and say, hey, we need to move 5,000 from this same department operational expense to this other line. We've never done that. That's consistent with other counties' policies, but we think we'd be well served to spell that out and have a budget adjustment policy similar to the process you all went through with the development of the fund balance policy that was adopted last year. So I know that's a lot of background, and what you have in your packet again is staff's attempt to, hey, this is what a budget adjustment policy might look like. A matrix, as I'll call it, about what those categories might be and what the consideration might look like. And then Sam did a really nice job of putting together some examples of what those various budget adjustments or amendments would look like. So it's agendized for you if you want to take action today, but this is really the start of a conversation, I think, that will take some additional time. So that's the high level. Sam, keep me honest, what'd I miss? Or how could have said that better, which you're going to say better right now.
No, you did a great job of explaining what we're trying to do. Again, just bringing clarity around the policy so that it, again, can be transferred from year to year with everybody understanding exactly what they're doing. Clearly defines the units of appropriation as well as budget categories so that as you're going through this, what is and isn't allowed is done by 5 different categories there. Again, examples of each type. Follow it just so that there's a reference point as to what's allowed.
And certainly if there's additional definitions, I know Supervisor Marshall reached out with Vice Chair Marshall reached out with a clarifying question, which was the same one that Chair Robinson had on appropriation unit. Is that the same as level of appropriation? And we can clean up some language to make that more clear, but this is, again, I just want to make sure everyone understands. This is staff put together materials to start a conversation. And we're happy to answer any questions, but clarity is always helpful.
I had also made a comment that in reviewing the budget message, we have a glossary in there beginning of page 182 with definitions, and I would just ask that we be consistent with our policy and that glossary in terms of how we're defining different things, because I just think it would be better for internal consistency and better understanding. So if you can take the better of the definitions of the two and put it in the policy, I think that would be helpful. And one of the questions that I would ask the committee of is, there's the 10% threshold that's allowed under state statute. And the question is that what threshold are you comfortable, and maybe it's a question for the board, not having the board involved, because we've got some departments that 10% is $1 million, and others where 10% may be 6,000 or, or $12,000. So there's a wide variety in what a 10% is, and do you want to put a numeric standard or look at that 10%? Chair Gibbs.
I guess the only, the concern, when you spell it out, the 10% of the total budget, although I would say that there's never going to be a situation, well, I don't say never, the likelihood of a situation where a department's going to come and have 10% freed up from a specific line item in their budget to be able to be reallocated. An example would be the sheriff's department. Their total overall budget, $25 million. They're not going to have $2.5 million free in a department line item to be moved to a different line item. So even though I understand the concern, we know as we budget, everything has been getting tighter and tighter. So I'm not so overly concerned about the 10% rule in the fact that this committee still has the discretion, if it feels that it's outside of what would be acceptable, it could move potentially it to the full board for its consideration.
Other thoughts? Vice Chair Marshall.
I had one question on if earlier in the year you make a 5% budget adjustment change and later in the year you make an additional 6%, is that considered cumulative, the 10%?
Great question. Short answer, I'm gonna jump in and then hopefully Sam doesn't have to correct me. Yes, it is an aggregate amount. So if you did an amendment in the beginning of the year and then another later that exceeds the 10% threshold in 6590, and I do think if we look at that memo, there's some nuance to it. It's not just 10%. You also, the statute allows, excuse me, a single committee you could structure your rules to have a single committee essentially control the contingent fund. You have a separate approach. Marathon County's got its nuanced approach of an HR finance allocation contingency and then a general contingency. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it, which is why we wanted to start the conversation, and we do have examples from other counties about how that would go. But short answer, you look at the aggregate for the total budget amendments throughout the year. Is that right, Sam?
Correct.
Or Supervisor Lemmer.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I might be 10 steps behind everybody on this, apologies. But I guess I don't understand if we are allowing department heads and possibly the administrator to reallocate, up to 10%, are we losing some transparency here? And could there be some sort of then reporting on a, quarterly basis on what those are? I don't know. Again, I'm not 100% sure I understand
Great question.
how this works.
Short answer there, I want to go to your scenario. Administration and a department head, we cannot reallocate under the law from one department to another. So let's use Chair Gibbs' example of the sheriff's office. If there's a reason, a rationale for why we need to take funding from, or even the contingency fund or another department to move it to the sheriff's office for an unforeseen expenditure. There is no world in which administration or department heads can do that. That is contrary to 6590. What 6590 allows is if you have that scenario of the sheriff's office has a need for, let's use $1 million. So under the 10% threshold, 6590 allows if the board adopts an ordinance and a policy that would allow it, it allows a committee as opposed to the full board to allocate that $1 million from, hey, we need it from contingency to move it to the sheriff's office because we have a significant increase in inmate housing expense. That would be what you could allow under your rules. You could not have a single committee do that if the number was 5 million, because that would exceed the $10 million, 10% threshold. So the policy that we're talking about really deals with everything from the very low end, which, if you can take time to do this, again, we're not trying to get something through today. But Sam's budget examples, so category 1, which is something that administration working with finance and a department head could essentially approve. If a department needed to spend an additional $50,000 on contractual services, in that individual line item, so on category 1 budget adjustment example Sam has, they need to spend $50,000 more in that line, but they have $50,000 in another line. That has never gone to the full board before. And there's a reason for that. Those things change, but a department can't spend more money at the appropriation level, their department budget. Nobody can spend more money than the money they were given, absent some form of authorization from a governing body, whether that's a committee or the full board, when we get to the end of however you guys want this to go. So it's, hey, I needed less paper and more stamps. Those things end up in a different line. Does that help your question? Or Sam, you want to add something?
What it'll do is on the year-to-date budgets that you see on that, monthly, quarterly basis, is you'll see the original appropriated budget in there, but then where you see this change is on that second column there. And again, it's just changing from one expenditure to the other. So it eliminates the need to kind of bring forth like, oh, remember we were gonna spend 50,000 more on contractual services, but we're covering it by this throughout the year. So it just kind of keeps an up-to-date, accurate report. Again, can't change the budget overall that was appropriated to that department. It just allows them to change those budget categories, and it's pretty much only in the expenditures. Any change in the overall budget, though, still needs to go through full county board, whether it's 10% or not. It's just that 10% variance if you're switching from one department to another or from one department to another.
If I can give an, excuse me, if I can give an example for why that doesn't require a budget amendment, it is because at the end of the day, those things do change, and we want, above all else, it's really important that we code things to the place where they should be coded, right? There are a lot of times where you can argue, is this expense, could I classify it as something else? It helps us budget to see what those trends are. And if we have hey, I have money in my contractual services thing, I'll charge it there as opposed to, really, it's not a contractual service, it's supplies or something else. We want to know that. Budget amendment's not needed until, to Sam's point, it exceeds that budgeted allocation. So that's what category 1 lays out, is that situation that wouldn't require any action by the board. We just make sure it's right on the accounting side, that on the books, it's right. The far other end of that spectrum is my example with the sheriff's office needing $5 million. Any way you slice that, that has to come through the county board. It exceeds 10% of their budgeted allocation. 6590 is very clear. If it exceeds 10%, it's got to go to the full board and it's got to be a supermajority. The nuance is in the middle. And you can set up your rules in a variety of ways. It's just we should have, again, our perspective is policy and clarity of how you want us to do it.
Well, and I think what's most helpful is to know that category 1, that's not a change. Is category 2 a change?
Talk us through category. You want to talk us through, Sam, maybe it would be helpful just to go through each of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So a category 2 budget adjustment is because the county board of supervisors directs the administrator to accomplish something. So some of the things that we've kind of talked about throughout the year were the economic study, funding Allison Dairyland. If he didn't have it within his administrator special projects budget, he could go into another budget and allocate those fundings. When we look at a category 3A budget adjustment, this right here is where we have those two different departments that are sharing in a cost. So if you think of like a jail project and you've got facilities and the sheriff's office, they might be collectively going in on a project together. Because in that example, the ask there is $45,000 and it's less than 10% of the original appropriation in both units, which is the major key point there, is it has to be in both units. That would start as a recommendation from the department head to the administrator, have to go to all of the standing committees that are involved, and then to HR Finance, who could then approve it. Again, it cannot change the overall budget that the county approved in November in any fashion. It's just moving it from one budget to the other under 10%. Then when we get to a category 3B, this right here takes the example that this major repair is $450,000, which is over the 10% of these departments. That would then again start with the departments going to the standing committees and then to HR Finance and then finally to the county board for a 2/3 vote. Again, it's changing that appropriation by more than 10%. Then we go to the category 4. In this one, we have a expenditure that occurred, but we have revenues to cover it. So we are asking to increase that overall appropriation, even though that 75% is not 10% of the budget, it is an increase in the overall approved budget. Therefore, it has to go through, again, a lot of these start with the department addressing the administrator or recommending it to him, and then going through their standing committees, the HR Finance committee, and then the county board for a 2/3 vote. And then the last one, a category 5 budget adjustment, is asking for contingency or fund balance usage. That again is going to start with the department asking the county administrator, then to this committee, and then again to the county board for a 2/3 vote. So there will never be fund balance or contingency usage without coming to here. And by contingency usage, we're talking about the established ones in the fund balance. You know, we had a 200,000 for the jail, 10,000 for clerk of courts, and so on.
Yeah, if I just want to emphasize one thing, and that's Sam referenced the category 4. That is kind of the outlier, right? The rest of these are talking about budgeted, we have funds that are budgeted, but the overall county budget isn't changed. Category 4 is, holy man, we had a lot more revenue coming in to, suddenly everyone wants to camp all of the time. Campgrounds are full, we're bringing in a bunch of money, but our expenses also go up. Well, we can't exceed our expenditure amount without an approval by the board. Again, if you look at 6590, the nuance of 6590 in municipal budgeting, I shouldn't say the nuance, the threshold rule is you are held to your expenditure budget. You have room to, a certain amount of room, to organize how you want and set up policies how you want. When you're moving things within that expenditure amount, like, hey, we're under over here, we need some more over here. But if you're raising the whole thing, that's got to go to the full board, and that's what category 4 is. So I'll give you one example of, again, there's several different ways that you can organize it in the matrix we put together with those 5 categories. Brown County, for example, adds, I think they have a couple more categories, but one they added is anytime you're taking it from one department and giving it to another, has to go to the full board. That's not required by statute for the reasons we talked about. But they set that up, hey, if you're gonna do it that way, you're gonna take from one department to give to another, supermajority vote of the county board. I can tell you operationally, I can't think the last time we've actually had any budget amendment from one department to another. You frequently are talking about contingency, or if things get really rough, the big fund balance, the use of the general fund. When we had to do the jail project, that came to the full board, that was out of the general fund. It has not been my experience that you frequently move from one department to another.
So what are your wishes? Scott?
Just a question, I don't know if it was covered in that, but could there be a situation where it goes to the various committees and then it goes to HR Finance Committee, like that was one of the options for final approval? Could it be a situation where if it's unanimous on HR Finance Committee, then it's approved, but if there's even one objection, it's a veto, then it goes to the full board? Could we incorporate a rule like that?
You can do whatever you want in rules
I think,
within constraints, but
is that fair, Brian? I don't know if we
Brian
can do
gets to
anything.
draft it.
I don't know if we can do anything.
Don't say anything.
I'd have to look into that. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm for, if it's something easy that everybody agrees with to save some time, but if it's something controversial, I think, the ability to make that go to the full board, then I think for oversight would be good.
Yeah, I would agree with Brian. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any reason why you couldn't do that. And I do know that this body there's been on occasion where actions could have been, it's escaping me the specific situation, but I recall, hey, this should go to the full board being the discussion at this committee, and you can always move something to the full board that would otherwise you would have the authority to do.
Chair Gibbs and then Vice Chair Marshall.
My thought, when we talk about, unanimous versus non-unanimous, my thought would first go to a 2/3 majority. If we didn't fall into a 2/3 majority of the committee, then the default would be run it to the full board. That way, if you have some opposition, not just one person controlling, my thought would be that if you had a 2/3 majority requirement, that at the committee level, then anything outside of that could possibly go to the full board.
Vice Chair Marshall.
I also, as Supervisor Lemmer had pointed out, would like for category 1 that there's just an FYI, that a report monthly or that would just say, hey, we did this. Just because if you're comparing to current financial reports to the budget and you say, hey, that wasn't what we passed for a budget. So just as FYI, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Would that be for 1 and 2? I think it's implied with 2, but
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and I think 2 was interesting when we saw that from other counties that they had that. I don't know why you wouldn't just naturally incorporate the budget amendment into the resolution, which is what we do, but we belt and suspended that one, so.
any Supervisor Hart?
And just to follow up on Supervisor Marshall's comments too, I think, in reading what the other procedures for the other counties, I mean, it's just a simple, like, they submit a budget request form, and then that could just be something that's submitted to these committees for review, kind of like our claims allowance, though I know, or not the claims allowance, the question cost, where we just kind of, I don't know if we need approval of that, but just something for review.
Yeah, thinking out loud, I hadn't thought of this before, and Sam, if you have a better idea, please chime in, or if anyone does. Certainly, it would be more likely that a department is going to have that situation later in the year, right? Like, oh, maybe, and we can certainly do an end of year, when we do the end of year closeout, just report on all, could submit to you what the approved budget was for all the lines, and then where something was exceeded, I think would be how we would do that. Does that sound right, Sam?
Yeah, I'll come up with a strategy to make sure that it's communicated what exactly changed.
Any other discussion? If not, perhaps could you incorporate the discussion to, I don't think we made many changes, but maybe in the policy just for clarification relative to the reporting and others, and then bring that back at the next meeting?
Can I ask a clarifying question? On the point that Supervisor Poole and Chair Gibbs brought up about want to make sure I understand the direction. If we could proceed with the 10% category requiring approval by all of the standing committees that would be involved and HR Finance, and require a 2/3 majority, or we could do unanimous, whatever the thought is at HR Finance. Okay, so we can come back and massage that with those pieces. Any other pieces other than the FYI on category 1?
And then the definitions.
The definitions, okay.
Supervisor Hart?
Yeah, and just including in that just a little bit on the procedure, like I said, in reference to the other counties that were used as examples here. They do have like pretty good outlines of how that procedure works, and I'd like to see that included in our policy as well. Thank you.
Anything else? If not, we'll do that through consensus, and we'll see it back at perhaps our next meeting. The hope is that we can incorporate as much of this into the rules that will go to the new board. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to 7A, an update from the Human Resources Director and staff development and recommendations related to establishing salaries for constitutional officers.
Okay.
Molly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as it relates to the development of recommendations for the salaries for constitutional officers, just to clarify, so that the upcoming term is 2027 through 2030. Opposed to the 26 through 29. But as I believe you all know, pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 59.22, the board must establish the annual compensation for certain county elected offices prior to the earliest time for filing nomination papers. So the salaries for both the sheriff and the clerk of court do need to be established prior to April 15th, 2026 for that 2027 through 2030 term. Our process in the past has been relatively straightforward. We have tied these salaries directly to the county's classification and compensation schedule, with one exception that I am aware of, and that just happens to be in establishing the salaries for the current term for these two elected department heads, the sheriff and the clerk of court. So in early 2022, when we were establishing the salaries for the 2023 through 2026 term, we were aware of the fact that our classification and compensation schedule had kind of become outdated, and we were pending a classification and compensation study that was to be completed by the end of 2022. So I gathered some external comparables to establish the wages in a way that we thought ultimately the classification and compensation study would come back. So those wages for the current term were established using primarily external comparables, whereas in 2024, when we were establishing the wages for the county clerk, the treasurer, in the register of deeds for their current term, we did tie those back to the classification and compensation structure that had been implemented in 2023. So my intention in developing my proposal for this coming term for the sheriff and the clerk of court would be to bring that back into alignment with our newly implemented classification and compensation structure that we implemented this year in 2026. But wanted to see if there was a thought that I was missing anything or any additional or alternative direction you'd like to give as I prepare those recommendations.
And while the election's in November, we need to have this set by when nomination papers are taken out.
That's right.
So we have
April
clarity
15th.
on what that salary is. So it would be something we would act on in probably February.
So I'd like to bring that recommendation to your next meeting or, a meeting sooner rather than later. But before I prepare that, I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page with the direction for developing that recommendation.
Supervisor Lemmer?
Okay, just a quick question, maybe suggestion, I don't know. These are elected positions, and we can't, interview for them like we can somebody who has a certification. And I don't know what state statute says for, this, other than, is it possible that we set a base salary? Maybe it could be less than this, I don't know what that base salary would be, but then incentivize the people who are running to either be or get some sort of certification. And that could be tiered, a local certification. Again, I don't know what kind of certifications you would need in these positions. Hopefully you do in your expertise. But, and then maybe a state and a federal or a national, whatever, certification, so that we have a little more agency in who we get running.
I certainly can understand the desire to do something such as that.
I would just comment that
But
the current
I see
sheriff-
Brian with his finger on the button, and I think unfortunately the short answer is no, we really cannot.
We can step it year to year,
We can,
but it's got to
the-
be a blanket.
The
for
full
anybody.
annual salary for each year of the term needs to be established prior to this point. We historically had made a little bit of an error in that, quite frankly. We had established a base salary and then said that, the percentage that was allocated by the board for the pay for performance would then get provided to those elected department heads as a lump sum. But since there was no clarity of what that was, we've moved away from that model because it was determined to be inappropriate, given what our requirements are. So anything to add from your perspective, Brian?
No, you have to, like, we said, you have to set it when they take the papers out. I mean, there's really no requirement, at least for the sheriff, that you're a certified law enforcement officer, basically 18 and upright and taking nourishment, and you can get elected, so not to be glib about it, but I mean there's
Well, I guess
not a
that's
lot of
my
requirements.
I guess that's my point. And if we have it published that here's the salary, and if you have this or this or this, you get this or this or this. So it is published. It's not like it's unclear. It's just flexible. because we don't know who we're going to get. And then let's say Ann Lemmer decides she's going to run for sheriff. Don't worry, I'm not. But let's just say I am. It would incentivize me then to get that certification later.
Yeah, great ideas.
Love it.
You should bring those ideas to your local legislator, and it's just not allowed under the law. And I think I want to make sure we hit on Molly's point as well about the way we used to do it back in, it was like, I remember 2016. To just recap what she referenced, we tied it to the scale. And then if the board allocated 2.75% for pay for performance, they got 2.75. The next year, if you allocated 3, they got 3. There's a couple counties that still do that. Candidly, I think the wide consensus, the broad consensus is, yeah, you really can't do that. You need to set the number before papers are taken out. And I want to just talk about how we would do that to make sure we're going to bring, Molly's going to have a recommendation for you at your next meeting, and it's going to be great. But what the plan is, you have adopted, the board gave direction to adopt a pay compensation grid. We'll tie it to that grid. That grid has steps. Would envision, we'll pick a start. Each year would be a step, and then we will forecast, because what also happens during an elected's term, and that you'll talk about annually through the budget process now, is what shift happens in that scale. So if the step that we're talking about, moving from step, for example, from step 1 to step 2 is a 2.5% increase, what additional percent, is it a percent range shift? Because the whole range is shifting. We will bring you the defined numbers for each of the years, because that, we all believe, is what the statute requires. And ideas of incentivizing and or incentive pay, bonus pay, just not we don't believe they're permitted under state law.
So is the overall approach that Molly had laid out acceptable from the perspective of approaching how we'll set the salaries for those two positions? Tying it into our compensation system. So I think you have the direction.
I will do that. Thank you. So I guess then we can pivot to the kind of next item here as it relates to positions, vacancies. As you can imagine, this position data is something that changes constantly. We post and fill positions, and positions come vacant all the time. I have recruiters working full-time on this. So this is something that changes daily, and something that my staff and I keep a very close eye on to, kind of uncover and keep an eye on any trends. So that said, to provide you the most up-to-date and accurate information, I just ran this report a few hours ago. I do have some printed copies for you, but you also should be receiving an electronic copy from the administrator, or perhaps you already have. As you'll see that this data, there's a lot there. So to be able to filter it and pivot it to see certain subsets of this data is going to be a lot more meaningful. So what you have in front of you is just a static page, but once you receive and kind of dig into that electronic Excel spreadsheet, you're going to be able to kind of get probably more information from that. But the spreadsheet that was sent does have 4 tabs, and I've printed each of those tabs for you and can kind of walk through that at a high level of what each of them means, and then, of course, give you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have. So just to kind of start out on that all positions tab, and for the purposes of this, I did exclude Central Wisconsin Airport, the Aging Disability Resource Center, as well as the library. However, in that electronic version, that data is there. So you can expand that, open it, filter it on that. But as it relates to our positions, there are a total of 676 positions within those departments. again, county departments other than CWA, ADRC, and the library. 620 of those are filled positions, and 56 of those are currently unfilled. Not all the positions are full-time. So the full-time equivalent in terms of the positions, so of those 676 positions, the full-time equivalent is 668.68. So a position is essentially a person and a role, whereas the full-time equivalent is more how much that individual is working. That's not a great way to put it, but we can get to that if there's questions. So of those 620 filled positions, 6 of them are actually underfilled. And so there is a sheet specific to underfilled positions. What that means is the percentage that's allocated to that position is more than how that position is filled. So for example, a department may have allocation for a 1.0 or 100%, and the individual filling that role based on either personal or operational needs may only be working 90% of that full-time equivalent. For the most part, these are on a temporary basis. So again, this is a point in time information that I have in front of you. So of those 6 underfilled positions, we've got 95.5% of the unused allocation. So just less than the equivalent of 1 full-time person that is, again, underfilled. And so of those 56 unfilled, so of course our underfilled positions are filled. There's a body, there's a person. It's just not filled to the extent that it's allocated. But those unfilled positions, 13 of them are frozen. You can see the details of that freeze on the unfilled position sheet that you have in front of you, or on that tab of the spreadsheet. And so what frozen means that they weren't, the allocation remains, but it wasn't budgeted. So there's no intent to fill it. There's no money to fill it at this time, but the allocation still remains because the thought or hope is that, in the future, that may still be needed and can be budgeted for in a future budget cycle. So of those 30 open positions, of the 56 unfilled positions, like I said, 13 of those are frozen, but 30 of them have open requisitions, and then again, the details of those requisitions is on that tab. Note that some of those requisitions are from multiple vacancies. For example, corrections officers, social workers, we have multiple vacancies of that type. We don't post multiple job postings, we post one, and then we try to fill multiple vacancies through that one job posting. So, in 6 of those 30 requisitions, you'll see on that tab too, there's a highlighted number. Those are ones that they're open requisitions, but there's an accepted offer, and we're just waiting for that new hire to start. So the requisition remains open, but the position is filled with a future fill date. So certainly want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions. Again, this data becomes a lot more meaningful when you have it in front of you in a flexible way that you can kind of pivot and sort and see what this looks like. But again, at the kind of punchline here, we have that those 676 positions, 620 of them are filled, 56 of them are not filled, 6 of them are underfilled. And I guess I'll just add that, and this isn't reflected on the report you have in front of you, but we've been really pleased, I guess, with the trend of number of applicants per requisition, the number of days we've needed to keep requisitions open. In 2021, we had an average of 9 applicants per requisition, which was down significantly from where we were historically. So far in 2026, we've had 10 requisitions, and we're averaging 17 applicants, which is a lot more than we've gotten. I personally did a recruitment not too long ago, got 49 applicants, and they were good candidates. So it's exciting.
Are there any questions for Molly? This is helpful, thank you. All right, we move on to the update on health and benefit consultant selection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as you are all aware, we deemed it appropriate to test the waters on healthcare consultants, just due to the fact that we had been with the same firm for a number of years, and ensuring that we're staying competitive market-wise, and that we're really exploring all options that we have open to us. And so in order to do that, we prepared a request for proposal. As stated in the memo that was contained in your packet, we had Alera Group, National Insurance Services, McClone, Hub International, Siegel, Aris, M3, and USI all submit proposals. I will say that there were varying stages of completion with some of them, but we did deem it appropriate to still rate all of them with the, under the guise of the fact that we could ask for additional information if there was something really compelling that we wanted to see out of one specific consultant. So we did go through and rate and evaluate all of them, even though some submittals were not as complete as others. There was one that was completely eliminated because they submitted for disability insurance, and that was it, which didn't fit the bill at all. And so we went through them. There was a lot of data. One of our submittals was over 200 pages. So it was a lot to comb through. But when all of the ratings were completed, the top three were USI, M3, and National Insurance Services, NIS. So at that point, we conducted interviews. It was Deputy Administrator Holman, myself, the County Administrator, Jason Hake from North Central, and Molly did sit in on one or two of them as well, but was kind of pulled between competing priorities during that time. In order to prepare for the interview, everyone was sent the same email with the same instructions as to what we wanted to see in that interview, questions we wanted answers to, and items that we wanted them to bring and prepare for us. So those were all very good, very interesting. They all had, I would say, strong points and points that weren't so strong. After we completed that, we did ask for some follow-up information from at least one of the consultants on reporting. We wanted to make sure it was as robust as we were hoping for, ask those questions, ensure that we would really get the service that we were looking for. And ultimately, National Insurance Services was selected as the vendor of choice. I wanted to just highlight a little bit about NIS. They have had more than 50 years of experience serving solely public sector entities, so cities, counties, and school districts. They've got a lot of demonstrated expertise in a fully insured and a self-insured environment. They also have actuarial modeling, claims analytics, long-term funding, strategy development, and they have experience with employee clinics. In fact, one of the consultants used to actually set up employee clinics, so a lot of expertise surrounding that. They have a strong emphasis on employee education and engagement, which I think was really important. They believe in on-site support and being on-site during open enrollment, which is huge, ongoing communication throughout the year, availability to our HR staff to ensure that they have the support that they need. So I do think this is going to be a really exciting time for us to really dig in and evaluate where we're at, evaluate the return on investment of our employee clinic. Is it working? Is it not working? Do we need to tailor our strategy? Do we need different ideas going forward? And so the consulting agreement has been signed. I did receive our letter of agency today. We will get that signed, and then they will start, even though the contract doesn't start until March 1st, they are going to start gathering our data and completing some of that analysis immediately. So we're really excited. We have started the planning process for transition planning, so meeting with the HR team, meeting with this committee. They will be coming to personally meet with you. initially, and then once they've had a chance to evaluate and look at our data so that they can talk with you and educate you on where we are and what they're going to be looking to do in the future. And then eventually, after the election, to be in front of the new county board as well, just to build that relationship, build that trust, and to make sure that they're understanding the priorities. So with that, any questions for me?
Vice Chair Marshall.
Thank you, Candace. I know that you had rated each company. What were their suggestions on plan changes that, on how to reduce our costs per employee?
That won't happen in the initial interview phase. They'll offer ideas and theories, which they all did. But until they can really do that deep dive into our data, they're not going to be able to make a recommendation necessarily on what would be best for us. You know, what they all said is, we're going to look at where you are. We're going to look at your claims, your high claimant costs, your pooling costs, all of these varying things, and then determine, are you better in a fully insured model? Are you better in a self-insured model? Are there years where we think we're going to need some transition years to get from one model into the next model to where it makes sense so that we're getting cost containment while not reducing the employee benefit overall? So they all had some, you know, method that they could recommend, but those real specifics won't come until they get into our data. And I think that's why it was really important that we found a team that we thought would really be innovative and would really partner with us to do a deep dive into that data, to make recommendations that make sense and give us a long-term strategy, not just a year to year, well, this year we're going to try this, but really let's make a strategy to take us into the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we look forward to meeting with them and probably in March, if they're under.
I believe, yes, we have them coming to this committee in March and then in the full board in May.
Thank you for that update. All right, we'll move on to Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the county clerk's office, we're in a little bit of a getting geared up for a very busy year and also closing out some things from 2025. So I have some final stats for you from 2025. We issued 958 passports and we processed 632 marriage licenses last year. So far this year, we have done a lot of passports. We're on track with 89 for the month. And marriage licenses are a little bit down with 19, but it's not wedding season really right now. We do have several appointments scheduled tonight during the county board meeting. So we'll serve several families tonight to get their primarily passports. I think we have one marriage license. We are working very closely with RIA and administration on tax deeds. And over the last couple weeks, we have processed 5 repurchases from folks who had their properties taken either via the in-rem process or tax deed. And we have worked with them so they could repurchase their properties and they have been deeded back to the former owners. We did sell 2 properties on Wisconsin Surplus a couple weeks ago. And then over the next month, we will be listing 42 parcels for sale once we receive all of the appraisals back from Gordy. So we're probably going to do those in batches so that we don't have one overwhelmingly large posting go up on Wisconsin Surplus. So we anticipate that we should have maybe a dozen ready to post by the end of next week. Elections. There are 2 cities and 3 school districts with primaries in February. And that affects 19 of our municipalities. So thankfully, it's not a countywide primary. We're using this primary as a training opportunity. Our new clerks, we're going to ask them to go to municipalities that have a primary and kind of just observe and get their feet wet, see what goes on during an election day. Kelly has been working very closely with our new clerks to get them trained in WISVOTE, making sure that they know what their expectations are. And then I have been busy doing trainings for chief inspectors, making sure that they can be certified to run the elections on election day. There are still some election bills that are working their way through the legislature. There was one that had a hearing today, and then I'll be traveling to Madison tomorrow to testify regarding another bill that is before the Assembly that is related to our voter rolls and verifying addresses with the USPS before clerks send out absentee ballots. So it'll be interesting to see as the legislature wraps up their session to see what gets through, and then even more interesting, what the governor is going to sign off on for us to have in place for the fall elections. One thing that I'm really excited about, Brian and I have been invited to participate with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. It's a national organization who has been working very hard the last couple of years to set up a joint partnership between election administrators and law enforcement, and they're kind of pivoting now to set up a relationship between election administrators and attorneys, either city attorneys, corp counsels for counties. So Brian and I have been permitted or invited to participate in kind of that grassroots, ground-breaking effort to set that up. And so Marathon County will be on the front lines of getting that. And so I'm really excited about that. So that's basically what's been going on in the county clerk's office. And if anybody has any questions, I'm available anytime to answer those.
Any questions? Thank you. And you do a great job of supporting the county board.
That too. That kind of goes without saying.
All right. Facilities update. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just start by saying that with the cold temperatures we've had in the last part of last year and early this year, they've generated several operational flow orders, which is just an industry phrase for when cold temps push the existing infrastructure to its limits because the demand increases as much as it does. These haven't impacted our cost via Constellation, which is most of our large volume purchases, or the market overall, but the charges from WPS from the city gate to our meters, those have gone up quite a bit, even though our gas use has been the same or a little less. And those are largely out of our control, but I did reach out to WPS to better understand the price adjustments that I'm seeing so that maybe there's ways we can try to mitigate those increases. But ultimately, there's only so much gas in a pipeline, and the cold has also affected gas production, whether it's because they've shut down fields or because the cost of production are low because of costs on the market for crude and natural gas. But these cold weather periods are when the transport costs and daily costs really spike dramatically. Prior to the cold, the futures markets and the market in general was dropping quite a bit due to warmer forecasts overall. I think we'll see a return to that once we get through these next couple of weeks, which should position us better for looking ahead with the forward purchasing strategy, which is essentially taking advantage of prices that are backward in the market so that you lock in some volume at prices that provide more stability and predictability year to year for natural gas anyway. On the conservation effort front, we've continued to work with a vendor to dial in the major and minor HVAC systems at the North Central Healthcare Campus and on the county side as well. So we're setting those up in phases. With the goal to continue reducing consumption and provide a per square foot savings that provides a ROI of about 12 to 15 months, depending on the building we're looking at. Focus on Energy does have a program for this, but it requires you to do it after 5 years. And so the buildings that are not 5 years old or won't be 5 years old anytime soon, we're moving forward with the newer buildings anyway, because even if we might get $20,000 from Focus on Energy at the 5-year mark, we would realize the same amount or more in between when we did the work and when the 5-year trigger was hit. So it's a no-brainer, and it's worked very well with what they've done so far. Similarly, because of the cold weather, I'm working with facility staff to contemplate how can we complement what we already do because of the cold weather to have a cold weather strategy so we can kind of communicate to departments if we're ratcheting down thermostats, things like that, so that people are aware of why it might be a little chillier than, 72 degrees in a particular hallway at North Central. But it is a bit of a challenge because there's no one size fits all because you have different equipment, different requirements. But the intent is to put something together that can complement things. In short, for the severe cold in general, there were no major issues we experienced due to the cold. There was, interestingly, some electronics failures because I guess at around 50 below zero, a lot of components start to stop working as well, or the metal starts to contract in a way that the different components don't work the way they should. But we corrected those. Some of them were very early in the morning, but nevertheless, staff was on site and taking care of the campus. There were a couple instances of some minor pipe freezing. We've been working on that in smaller outbuildings, nothing major. But overall, the facilities and infrastructure held up. And parks and facilities staff have also been able to manage the snow and ice, which is a challenge when the temperatures get this low, whether it's a courthouse or down at the campus. So that's gone very well. We're also we've been doing a lot of work with the satellite highway shops to work on issues there, but we're also including the option to pull their equipment onto our building automated system so that we can see things before they happen. In this last cold spell, we had a situation with a bad gas valve at Hatley, which we saw and were able to resolve, but there was an issue in the Stratford shop that we had not installed this yet, so we didn't see it. Wasn't a major thing, we're resolving that, but nevertheless, in the future, having that ability to reach out and tell them, hey, go to that corner, turn that knob or something to mitigate the problem will be very useful when this sort of thing happens. We did have a serious issue unrelated to the cold, but certainly complicated by it at North Central with some heat expansion joints. We did have to turn the heat off for a few hours on one of the coldest days of the year. So that was an interesting challenge, but it was a well-coordinated effort. North Central's leadership and staff prepared well for the work to be done. I communicated consistently with their leadership as the work was done. As we were doing that, we also identified another issue from the original build that we'll resolve later in the year. But that went as well as it possibly could. The temperatures across the building held better than we thought they would, actually. And we had a good timely assist from one of our vendors that really helped facilities staff get their hands wrapped around it. But big thanks to the HVAC staff and everyone who played a part in getting that accomplished because it was no small feat and spectacularly poor timing. On the staffing front, I'll mirror what Molly said earlier. We had our last interview today for the 3 positions that we have open, 2 building maintenance tech positions. They're focused on the grounds at North Central Healthcare. Both of those individuals have retired in January, and a custodian 2 position. So we've offered the position for the custodian. They'll be working at the library on a first shift when they start, so that will actually complement the night shift in the way that when things happen at the library during the day, and there's a lot of public use, somebody will be there throughout the day and the night, and we'll have them working together so that there's always somebody to respond to that. The recruitments, both recruitments had 20 candidates in the pool, and I'm firm in the belief that that's a result of the wage study because our previous recruitments, they've had good candidates, which we ended up hiring, but the number of experienced and qualified candidates applying was fewer. In this case, we had 6 to 8 that we brought in for interviews, and all of them could start in a position. So you're really kind of having the luxury of kind of picking between a lot of good people to fill those spots. So that's been very nice. And the highway project update, facilities, conservation, planning and zoning, and highway staff, we continue to work towards the final schematic design. We'll be sending the sort of 90%, if you will, completed schematics to Myron so they can start doing their initial cost estimating. That's going to inform the design development and next steps for the conversations at this committee and infrastructure, as well as the county board. Our intention is to have that go through the committees and board for discussing next steps in March. And I should say, too, that Parks has also been very helpful in discussing our options with some of the trees that are out there. I think we'll end up in sort of a break-even proposition with if we can get a logger to come in and take some of them down. There's a lot of brushing and scrubbing to do as well. But we worked with the prior residents, other than the Shefkins, who have, I think, through May with their property. But we worked with the Golumbevsky family to give them additional time to remove their personal items from the property. We continue to help them with that, even though we have the keys, because when we're on site and there's things that they can grab, we're helping facilitate that because there was a lot of things for them to move. The communication with them went very well, and it was consistent throughout, so everybody was on the same page. But our intent's always been to work with them as much as possible as they move into their new homes. We've also been working with the Cronenwetter Fire Department on the potential for utilizing the structures for training purposes prior to demolition and site preparation. They're in communication with SAFER and North Central Technical College and others about how to maximize the opportunity for fire departments in the area, given that these types of things don't come up very often. Asbestos abatement, we got the report back last week. That should be pretty minimal and is slated to start mid-February. So it should be done by the third week. And that's going to open the window for the fire departments to start coordinating their training and also help us get the timelines set for demolition, site preparation, and other work that's associated with where we're at in the project. And all of that is also done and is allowed, I should say, prior to the site plan approval from the Village of Cronenwetter. We have another meeting set up with the Village of Cronenwetter to bring everyone up to date, hear back from the village on some of the work that they were looking to do, and to tee up all the next steps in the municipal process. But overall, I'd say the communication with the village has gone very well. We've all come up with really good ideas that have been win-wins for everybody, so that those have been very fruitful conversations and have certainly helped the project progress. On the UWSP Wausau UWMC front, we continue to work with Aaron Andrews on the final draft of the RFP that will go out in early February, assuming the board approves the authorizing resolution tonight. The RFP does include all the feedback received from this committee and others, and that's all in there and will be included when it goes out. As part of this, we're still looking at setting up a meeting for prospective proposers in a local area and hold that prior to the mandatory walkthrough that's part of the RFP process. I'll be meeting with Sarah Severson about the best approach for that tomorrow. The staff at UW are continuing to do a great deal to help us out with the repairs, other issues as they come up, facilitating the types of get-togethers, even this meeting I just referenced. Administrator Leonard and I conducted one walkthrough of the Civic Center to look at what's all in the facility so that we understand what's all in there and what prospective users might want to stay. And we'll continue to do, that one's I'd say a little easier in terms of interest, but those walkthroughs will continue throughout the year to look at what else is in each of the buildings and each of the rooms in the buildings. But the intent is being to identify what's present to facilitate the final decisions on the disposition of those items. For Thomas Street and River Drive, I've been reaching out to the Marathon County Employees Credit Union leadership to figure out if they have a schedule for the work they need at their new location, so that we can kind of dovetail that timetable with the RFP timetable, so there's not like a big gap between when you might get responses and when people are actually moving out of Thomas Street. A couple other last notes. We are starting a collaboration with Parks at the North Central Healthcare Campus as well on snow removal, sharing personnel, equipment, and that's going to be huge for us because we've been doing that entire campus with 2 V-plow trucks, which is a lot of back and forth, you might imagine. So that's going to make things go a lot quicker. Thanks to Parks for everything that they're doing there. I'm sending 4 supervisors to leadership training that's coming up. The highway commissioner identified the opportunity, and that'll be held at North Central Technical College later in the year. And then also lastly, with the new building codes that are in place, we finally found what looks to be a really good training down at UW and Madison, where our project planners are both going to be able to go there and absorb everything they need to know so that they can better coordinate the work they're doing, but also relay the information they need to relay to our staff and other contractors who may not be as up to speed as we want them to be, them being everybody involved, so that we're checking all the right boxes the right way. And with that, I will answer any questions you might have.
Quick question relative to the highway facility. How are we doing with incorporating alternative energy, solar or others into that design?
At this point, the schematic design is not final. They've been focusing more on the layout of the building and not the associated systems. But the architect does know and has been communicated many times that we're wanting to look at multiple strategies that make sense with the location, make sense with what modern technology and along those lines. So we haven't really dug into that topic yet, but that will become more of a topic once we have the building position where it's going to go and the sort of the general layout of the buildings settled. That's been the initial focus, but that's certainly on everybody's radar, and I can bring that back once we discuss it in more detail.
Any other questions? Thank you for a comprehensive report.
Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the comprehensive plan. And that was shared with you at the last meeting and is back here. And Administrator Lori's on. Lori, if you want to.
Thank you, Chair Robinson. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, we just put this in your packet. I know last time around we did miss putting the summary of all the goals and objectives of the draft in your packet, so we wanted to make sure we got that in there. This time, as a reminder, a full draft of the comprehensive plan is out there right now for review, and the executive committee is looking for feedback, especially as it relates to the goals and objectives of the plan prior to their February 12th, 2026 meeting. So you can bring forth suggestions at this committee meeting, or you can also reach out to myself, Jeff Pritchard, my planner, and CC Administrator Leonard too, on any comments or suggestions you would like us to bring to the executive committee. And especially they're looking for feedback as it relates to the goals and objectives in the draft.
So again, in the current comprehensive plan and strategic plan, the HR Finance Property Committee has had a secondary role versus a lead role in many of the activities. And I would perhaps direct you to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Chapter 12 as one of those areas where we might be able to have some impact. But obviously there are others in terms of cost-effective services and others. But do members have any thoughts as to things that are in that shouldn't be, or that aren't in that should be, or clarification? Vice Chair Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under Chapter 8 Infrastructure, I know the transportation goals says to maintain to the highest standards to allow safe and efficient movement of people and goods and services in and throughout the county. However, I know currently our PACER rating's at 7. When you use the word highest, doesn't that imply that we'll maintain a PACER rating better than 7?
I'll take a stab at that as a former chair of the Infrastructure Committee. I think it's trying to be realistic, and I think that PACER rating of 7 is the goal, the implied goal, but I could be wrong, but I think that's what's implied with that language.
Okay. Just like I said, the word highest would lead me to believe that you were going to try to achieve the highest PACER rating rather than a 7. And then also, I was just wondering on the Objective 3, Health and Human Services, or Health and Human Services Chapter, Objective 2 says expand local mental health services. Are we looking to, I'm just not sure that we have the financial structure to expand things rather than maintain things.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great. I'm a big fan of the phrase words matter, and I like to wordsmith stuff. I like the idea of adding the term practicable after your relative to the transportation section. And as it relates to objective number 2 and the Health and Human Services goal, I admittedly went down a bit of a rabbit hole last night with wordsmithing on specifically Chapter 3, and you identified one of the same areas that I did, and I was working with Lori to potential expansion, not to go deeper down the rabbit hole, but the goal as I see, or the objective as it relates to number 2, is really to increase access to timely, affordable, and effective treatment close to home. That is, we can do that a number of ways. We can remove barriers. And then to your point, if we actually the strategy we identify that we need to move forward is expanding services, that's a different policy discussion for the board. But so short explanation, you're spot on, and that was one of the changes I envisioned working with Lori on.
Others, Supervisor Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple in Chapter 7, number 2, where it says mitigate the impacts of heroin and methamphetamine epidemics in Marathon County. When we did the gap analysis, I thought a lot of the discussion was many of our people who are addicted are really addicted to alcohol, and I'm just wondering if that should be changed to something more broad, so we're not just looking at those two things. And maybe, I don't remember seeing this on the agenda for the Board of Health, but I wonder if the Board of Health, or at least, it should be focused on maybe to make sure that that's dialed in differently. Unless if that's tied to the opioid spending, then that wouldn't really fit. So just a thought on the alcohol piece being, I think, equally as important. And then the last one that I had was chapter, 11. I just take issue with objective number 2, saying that tourism would have a strong emphasis on outdoor recreation. I am a lover of the arts and would like to see an equal mention of the arts.
Should the, Chapter 7, should that be substance abuse disorder versus your opioids and other things as well?
Great. If I can add something, and Lori and I can chat on it. That was actually a change the county board made in 2022, I believe, when you updated your strategic plan. So we'll need to correct that language, but again, spot on, good catch. It currently reads under the strategic plan, mitigate the impacts of drug and alcohol abuse in Marathon County through evidence-based practices. It had historically been limited to heroin and methamphetamine, so we can reincorporate the language on that. I made note of that. And then can you share again what objective you just referenced for the arts?
Number 11, objective number 2 mentions outdoor education or outdoor recreation, but not the arts.
Mary thanks you. Other thoughts? And this, again, it's an ongoing process up until we adopt it it'll come to the county board in March. So if you have thoughts, please get them to Lori and/or members of the executive committee, but we will be voting on the updated comprehensive plan in March. Anything else? All right, thank you. That takes us to announcements. And please note that our next meeting is not on the 11th, but is on the 18th because of the Wisconsin Counties Association Leadership Meeting in Madison. So maybe some of us will see you there. Anything that you would like to see us take up at a future meeting? We're starting to get into that position where we have some flexibility of adding items. So I know that Vice Chair Marshall would like continued updates relative to where we are with the health insurance, and perhaps on a quarterly basis, once we get the new firm in, we can get that update. Anything else? Supervisor Lemmer?
I'm just looking ahead. Do we still have an HRFP meeting on the 24th then, or is that also canceled?
We will make that decision on the 18th based upon whether or not we have anything that needs to go to the county board meeting that.
Well, okay, Thank you.
So we may only have one meeting in February, but I always like to keep that, and we've always met before the county board in case there's an item that we need to take to the county board. So we will see. Anything else? If not, we're at item 9. Chair Gibbs moves to adjourn. Supervisor Lumber seconds. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye. Aye. We are